So recently I've got back into using my home flight simulator. I've actually used the simulator throughout every stage of my pilot training. Before getting my private pilot's license, I knew that I'd have a lesson coming up, for example stalls. I'd then go and fly that lesson on the simulator. The next day I'd fly it in the aircraft for real life, and back at the time I was starting doing plain old Ben, I'd have a GoPro in there and I'd be able to fly the lesson in the real world and then debrief from that. I carried on doing that the whole way up to becoming an airline pilot and flying the Dash 8 Q400 for Flybe. The sad demise of Flybe, and now the crisis we are finding ourselves in as pilots during COVID-19, currency is something that I'm genuinely concerned about. Currency from both general aviation flying and also the more procedural IFR flying, which you do day in, day out as an airline pilot. There's currently a lot of ex-Flybe pilots who are in a similar situation. I know a lot of you are based across the UK as general aviation pilots too, wondering how best you can keep current at this really uncertain time. That's why I got my home simulator set up again. I was a bit worried at first to do with how powerful the computer needs to be to run a home simulator. It's fair to say I've struggled with that over the years and currently have it installed on my late 2015 iMac. However, I've managed to optimise it really nicely and it works great. I wanted to use the simulator to practice two main types of flying, both the IFR flying that I'll do as an airline pilot and also the general aviation VFR cross-country flying. And I'm pleased to say it actually works great for both of these things. But before we get into what I've been doing flying wise on the simulator, let's just have a chat about the hardware and software that I've got installed. So as I said, I'm running a late 2015 iMac with Mac OS Catalina. The processor isn't too bad, it's a 3.2 GHz quad-core i5. I managed to upgrade the RAM on the iMac from 16GB to 32GB. To run a home flight simulator you do need a powerful CPU, but also the GPU, the graphics card, has to be quite powerful also. This is where my iMac does fall down slightly. It's only a AMD Radeon R9 with 2GB of RAM. And if you're looking at sort of a high-end gaming PC, those nowadays have 6GB or 8GB of RAM on the graphics card. So in regards to the controls that I've been using, I used to have a Satec Yoke, and it's around sort of 5 or 6 years old, and I've really actually struggled with that an awful lot. The biggest issue with the Satec is you only have about 45 degrees of rotation either side. And I've got a lot of motor memory from flying different aircraft types over the years, and I found that the small input that I put in on the Yoke, like you would in a normal aircraft, would be about doubled on the simulator, and it's really accentuated, and that creates you a situation where you're going to actually start over controlling the aircraft. Thankfully though, Transair has seen that I've been doing a lot of home simulator flying lately, and they've sent me the brand new Honeycomb aeronautical Yoke. I must say that I'm genuinely really impressed with this. The biggest benefit is the fact that you actually have 180-degree rotation, so this will move all the way to the left and all the way to the right. So if you find something like a Cessna 172, the input you put in on the Yoke in the simulator feels exactly the same as the real life aircraft. It also has a lot of switches on as well. Multiple different push to talk buttons, an autopilot disconnect switch, but behind the actual main Yoke you have master switches, avionic switches, and all of the relevant lights which you would use day to day flying an aircraft. Transair at the moment are aware that people like you and I are struggling with a lack of currency, and they've been really impressed with the Yoke, which is why they wanted to send me out one. But they also want to make sure that they can give a little bit back to the GA community as well. So at the moment they're offering £20 off the Honeycomb Yoke with the discount code PlainOldBen. So I'll put the link in the description if you're considering getting a new Yoke. I definitely highly recommend this if you're someone setting up a new simulator. The throttle quadrant I'm using is the Satec throttle quadrant, and that's fine. Honeycomb are bringing out their own throttle quadrant towards the end of the year, so I look forward to getting that and trying it. And I'm also using the Satec rudder pedals, and they are fine as well. Let's have a look at the graphics settings that I'm using. I have the settings around the mid-range, which offers me about 30 frames per second. This is perfect for me, as I don't really need much more than that. One thing which changes the frames per second is the anti-aliasing. So I have that on 2 times, and then if I fly an aircraft which is more complex, I'll just reduce the number of world objects down. Each notch that you bring it down offers about 7 to 8 frames per second. So they're the sort of rough settings that I use, but you have to think what you really need to achieve with this simulator. What's the purpose of you going on? As I've said, for me, I'm flying different training flights, both IFR and VFR, depending on the sort of flying that I feel like doing. Usually if you're flying IFR, you're flying a much more complex aircraft, which is going to lower the frames per second. But if you're IFR, you're probably flying in IMC, instrument meteorology conditions, i.e. cloud, so you don't really need the graphics to be that high if you're just looking in the cockpit at the primary flight display. So don't worry too much. If you've got a pretty low powered computer at home, but all you want to practice is procedural IFR flying, what I'd recommend doing is getting the X-Plane 11 demo, downloading it onto your laptop or PC, get that demo installed and just see how it works. If you just need to practice taking off in a Cessna or Piper, flying a circuit, reading through the checklist, operating the correct switch in the cockpit, you can do that on really terrible graphics. It's just getting yourself into the different procedures and practicing each stage as you go. One thing I've also done is pair 2 iPads to the X-Plane system, and this is something which is actually really easy to do. You download the app from the App Store. It's called G1000 PFD and G1000 MFD. You then just need to put a small plugin into your X-Plane folder, and you download that from the website that makes the iPad software. All you then need to make sure is that you're on the same Wi-Fi network. And the G1000 automatically connects to the simulator. I've got it here running on an iPad Pro, and it's amazing actually how accurate this system is. It's updated a lot more than the system is with X-Plane, and you can also buy, for a little bit extra, it's only a few pounds, the synthetic vision. The main reason that I like using the iPads connecting to X-Plane is because you're physically touching and pressing buttons on here and changing the settings. It's also a little bit bigger and closer, like it is in the real aircraft, for example when I'm flying the Cirrus SR22. All of the settings in here are modelled just like the real aircraft, and I actually first got this G1000 PFD before I started doing my multi-engine instrument training on the DA42. So what I'd actually do is go on the simulator, practice the flight I was going to fly the next day in real life in the DA42, and I'd be able to plan the route in here, look at how to program the FMS. And if you've never used the G1000 before, you're going to really quickly learn the different tricks and way around the system. What I found was, in reality, in the actual aircraft, your capacity is really low flying a much more complicated aircraft, and you just haven't got the spare capacity available to be learning this system in depth. So what I'd say to you guys out there who are going to go on to doing their multi-engine instrument rating training, or in fact fly an aircraft with the G1000, I'd highly recommend getting this and just practice using all the different settings. It actually becomes super easy when you get used to it. You can change the frequencies, you can put in a whole flight plan. You can use the G1000 to actually control the simulator with the autopilot modes. The only slight snag that I've seen with this is the fact that the G1000 here won't talk to the G1000 in the aircraft. So for example, if you're filling in a full flight plan route, that won't show in the aircraft. And also the modes that you have engaged on here with the autopilot, the FMA rows at the top will read correct, but they will be ever so slightly different on the actual sim. I've also got the MFD here on a separate iPad. I wouldn't worry too much about getting this as well. Don't think you've got to have 2 iPads to do this flight simulator training at all. You don't. This is nice to have, but you'll find when you're training, a lot of the time your scan is focused on the primary flight display. These apps aren't too expensive at all, and I'd highly recommend them. It makes it a much more immersive flying experience on the simulator. So I've talked about the hardware and software I'm using, and a little bit about the graphics settings on the computer, but what am I actually doing when I'm getting on the simulators? So I might be doing an IFR flight from A to B, or practicing a general aviation flight across the country in something like a Cessna 172. If we talk first about the IFR flights, one thing that I really like to use is something called VATSIM, and that's online air traffic control. I'm sure a lot of you are familiar with it, and I've used it a lot myself over the last sort of 10 years. And I must say nowadays I'm really impressed with it. If you're not too sure how it works, you basically register and you log in as a pilot, and there'll be different people all around the country who are acting as air traffic controllers, and they can't just log in and have a go. So I'm told from friends of mine that are air traffic controllers on there, they actually have to pass exams and pass different tests to go on and log on as air traffic control. The biggest reason for me that I like using VATSIM is the fact that it adds another level of seriousness on there. So for example, you have to file a flight plan, and you also have to fly real world routes and talk to air traffic controllers like you would in real life. And I've actually done some flights when they have events on, where I'll depart one airfield, talk to delivery, ground, tower, and I'll go to radar, then I'll go to London control, and then maybe Scottish control, another Scottish control, and then I'll go on to the arrival approach frequency, onto director, then onto tower at the next airfield, onto ground. So I've done flights where I've talked to 10 or 12 different controllers, and that is really, really impressive. So if I'm doing these IFR flights, one thing I'll have to make sure is that I've got a flight plan filed. And I use a website for this called SimBrief. SimBrief is really similar to Rocket Router or Auto Router, which are real-world flight planning software. You'll put in the route that you're going to fly from A to B, and also the alternate, and you'll put in the aircraft type on there. So for example, if we were flying a TBM 900, then it will work out a flight plan for that aircraft. You'll then have a look through the map to make sure it looks generally correct, and then you can export this straight away to an app called Navigraph. Navigraph is an iPad app, and it basically replicates Jeppesen charts. Having flown on the simulator to airports I've used in the real world with the real world JEPS plates, I genuinely struggle to tell any difference. With Navigraph then, you're able to click onto flights and actually import the flight that you've done through SimBrief, and it will then give you the whole route that is planned on there. You can access different charts at the airfield, look at the standard instrument departure, then have a look at the way you're going to route to the next airfield, and then you can pull up the standard arrival route, have a look at the plate you're going to use for the particular runway. That is after you've got the ATIS on VATSIM, and then you can give yourself an arrival brief and also a taxi brief for when you land. So with using VATSIM and much higher quality aircraft such as the TBM 900, it genuinely is really immersive. Flying from A to B on this, time will just disappear, and you've got to make sure that it's done in a real world manner. One thing I've also been doing in an instrument flying sense is using VATSIM to do more procedural flying. So I'll arrive at a different airfield, turn off the autopilot, and I'll be using the honeycomb yoke, and I'll be doing a lot of manual flying. So I'll be going to do raw data NDB holds, for example. I don't know what the wind is until I get to the airfield, so I've actually got to plan this, fly it correctly, because I'm on VATSIM online. Now, the other evening I spent a lot of time flying out of Southend Airfield, and I did every single approach going, manually, raw data with no guidance from the FMS. This is really important to keep that level of currency there. You may or may not be aware, depending on the level of flying that you're at the moment, that when you go to do your simulator assessment every 6 or 12 months at an airline, you actually are going to have to do some raw data manual flying. And practicing these skills manually on the simulator really helps. So it's fair to say I'm really impressed with the level of IFR currency that you're able to get on the simulator. The aircraft models are extremely well accurate, and I enjoy using these more complicated aircraft. If you want a really fun aircraft to fly IFR on X-Plane 11, then I was sent an aircraft called the Pocket Rocket, and it's basically a twin-seat PT6 turbine aircraft with a stupid amount of horsepower, over 450 horsepower. It's got acceleration like nothing else, and in the cruise at flight level 250 I'm seeing around Mach 0.62, which is really fast. That's great fun. I can practice the IFR in an aircraft which is just a joke to fly. They also sent me the brand new launched British Norman Islander. It's a much older aircraft, it has a Garmin 530 in, and not even a glass cockpit with the airspeed indicator or the HSI. So that's really good fun for practicing these IFR skills. And I do enjoy flying a variety of different aircraft on the simulator. It keeps your brain moving when you have to learn to fly a different aircraft with all the different speeds, etc., and the configuration and the different approach profiles. So that's how I like to fly IFR. In regards to doing VFR flying on the simulator, that can be quite tricky if you've not got a good level of quality scenery installed. So what I decided to do was invest a little bit of money, and you do need to do that with using these simulators. So I bought Orbex scenery. Orbex works really well. It's actually photorealistic textures, and a few people were worried when I was getting this scenery that it was going to kill my frames per second, but actually I've seen no difference, arguably a slight improvement on the frames per second. And what this means is you're able to fly VFR on a simulator, for me the first time I've been able to do that in 10-12 years, and actually navigate as you would in real life. If you really wanted to, genuinely, you could use VATSIM, log in, and you could plan with the real world weather you've got at the moment outside on a chart, an actual full plog, and fly that route. It's that accurate to see towns, turning points, particular features. Also, if you're flying to an airfield which has a control zone, you'll be cleared to route in via a particular point. You can then find that exact point through the scenery and route to join the airfield down via the published VRP entry and exit route. If, however, you're not one to enjoy flying with a simple map and compass, then you can actually link SkyDemon to X-Plane 11. Again, this is something which works extremely well. I can plan a full flight on SkyDemon, fly in the aircraft, which is very accurately modelled, and then also use SkyDemon to navigate as I would in real life, and adding that next level in there, logging into VATSIM online and having air traffic controllers to talk to. So we did this today. The flying reporter and I just fancied a bit of a flight on our simulators, and I managed to twist his arm into flying on there like I've been doing lately. And we flew from Shoreham up to Gloucester. We had an air traffic controller on at Shoreham. We had Farnborough LARS, the lower airspace radar unit to talk to, and then we also had a controller on when we arrived at Gloucester. I planned the route on SkyDemon, and there's around sort of 14 or 15 of us doing these group flights together. So if you are someone that is using VATSIM, just comment below or send me a message on Instagram. So we've talked about the hardware which I'm using and the software installed on the computer, and we've also talked a little bit about what I'm doing as a current professional pilot to keep current on a simulator and manage all of those different skills that you build up over the years for both IFR and VFR flying. So thanks a lot for watching this video. I hope everyone at the moment is keeping well. If you've enjoyed this video, please do subscribe and leave a comment below if you'd like to see me maybe replicate a flight that I do in the real world in the PA-28 or another aircraft. Perhaps the flying reporter and I could do a flight from A to B and make a video on the simulator like we would in the real world. Hope you enjoyed this video, guys, and I'll speak to you soon.